Let's look into lighting in Maya. Lighting is fairly similar to how it's done in the real world, where we have area lights, spotlights, we have sun lights. Whatever it might be, we can find an equivalent for it in Maya. Now, because Arnold is the main render engine in Maya, we have different Arnold lights to regular Maya lights. So we have them two different places, which is a little bit annoying, but it's not a huge problem once we get into it. We can find the main lights we're going to be using under Arnold, lights, and the one I reuse the vast majority of our time is the area light. If we hit play, now we can see what's going on, and then we can move it into place like so. The area light is a really soft and very comfortable light to use, and it gives you a ton of control. By default, you can see it looks like a square, and it's just placed with no rotation whatsoever like this. So what I prefer to do is I prefer to move it into place just by using rotate, move, and scale, and then just starting to block in the lighting from there. The exact same controls apply from this as for moving all other things in Maya. For all the lights in Arnold, we have different attributes. We can change the color of the light. We can make it really nice and yellow. We can also just put it back to white. We can also change the intensity, and we can also change the exposure. I tend to work with exposure, and this means that you're working in a more photographic sense. So if somebody tells you make it one stop brighter, you can hit 1 and make it one stop brighter. You're not based on lumens or some general value scale. You're based on the current visibility of it. It's a lot easier to give feedback, which is make this twice as bright, and then we set this to 2. And now it becomes twice as bright, or make this one stop down, which means make it half the brightness, set it to 1 again. So this also means that this is exponential. So if we set this to 7 now, it's not going to be 7 times brighter. Oh no, it's going to be a lot brighter. If we want to make this half again, 1 stop down, we set this to 6. So you can see it becomes brighter or darker really, really quickly. You can generally use a value range between 1 and 10, but once you start to go up into something like 15, and then you can see everything goes crazy. So you really want to be careful with something much higher than 10, because then the intensity just goes absolutely bananas. We can also use color temperature. This is based on the Kelvin scale. This is where a high number is really blue and cold, and a low number is really warm. So this is also a really nice way of controlling it. This is handy if you're used to real world lights, or if you just want to keep it a bit simple where you don't necessarily want a specific color, you just want to have cool or warm lights. I personally prefer to use color because the hair can really go crazy when it comes to what color I want. You can really make something funky, but that's personal preference, and it also depends on the need of your project. Generally, as a little tip, I prefer to keep a little bit of color in my light. If I'm lighting something like this and I want it to look fairly neutral, I'll still just make it a little bit, give it a little bit of heat or a little bit of coldness. It just adds a lot to it. We can also duplicate our lights around as well. This is done by Control D, or we can hold on the Shift key and we can just drag it over. So now we can see if we can get this like a nice little rim light on her. So now we can see we get this nice little rim on her like so. If you want to make this a lot colder, we can make this blue. We can make it even more blue like so. We can also scale it up. So if you want this to affect a bigger area, we can scale it up like so. One thing I really recommend you to do as well is that you name your lights. So this light will be called key. And then I used the underscore LHT, and then we can call this rim. So it's just really easy to know what these are. This becomes important once you're managing your scenes. We can also group them. We can hit the Control G, or I already have a little group where we can just place them in. It's a really good idea to group your lights. If you also scroll down a little, now we can see we have the general visibility. So here we can set if we want the key to be visible in camera or not. In this case, we do want this to be visible in camera. This here is a case where I had to click Control U in order for it to actually update. So if this happens to you and it doesn't update, just hit Control U to actually update the scene. So in this case, we can now see the camera, or we can disable it, and now it will be fully disabled. We can also set, should it be visible in diffuse, specularity. So if we don't want this to be visible in diffuse, we can do that. So now what you can see that it doesn't actually change the diffuse color, but it still changes the specularity, which means that we have kind of like a rim light, which only affects her back, but doesn't affect the other scene. So this is really useful. We can do the opposite as well, where we can make this only affect the diffuse and not the spec. What I use this mostly for is to make reflection lights. So in this case, you can see that there is a nice reflection on her. We can either disable this, so now there is no reflection on her and it's pure diffuse, or we can do the opposite, where it's pure spec. So now the only thing which is visible is actually the spec. This is a really good way of creating more interesting lights, where sometimes you just have to control the light a little. Let's say in this case, you really like the general shadow pattern on her, but you think this reflection is crazy ugly. Then you could disable spec for this. You could duplicate the light, like so. And we can make this light have the spec, control the spec, and not the diffuse. So now you can see that you can actually control the spec on her. You can control the reflection pattern on her without affecting the actual light. Now, this is where you're breaking physicality. So keep in mind that if you're doing this, that you need to know what you're doing. You need to make sure the camera isn't moving in crazy ways, but it does allow you to have really nice control over your lights. So if you really want the spec to be on her cheek, for instance, this is a good way of doing it. And of course, we could do this with subsurface as well, indirect, all these different parts of the render as well. Let's just pause this. And I'm just going to delete this and turn this back up, because I still want my light to work the way it should work. We don't want to cheat something too crazy in this case. Now let's hide our lights. So just hit H and then Control U. So by just hiding the lights, it's not necessarily going to work. I've had cases where this doesn't do anything. And then we just have to hit Control U, or we have to go to Render and Update Full Scene, or hit Control U. So if you do something like this, you hide a light and the light isn't actually hidden, just refresh the full scene. So we're going to be hiding these two, and then we're going to look into some more lights. We are going to be looking under the lights you find under the Create menu, Lights, and we're going to be looking into the Direction light. The Direction light looks incredibly boring in this case, and that's because this will emulate a sunlight. And now it's just straightforward. The way this works is that you can see that the gizmo is all parallel. The light rays in this case are entirely parallel. This is similar to a sunlight. Now, obviously, the sunlight isn't actually parallel. It comes from a point. Technically, sunlight should be a point light, but it's so far away that for all intents and purposes, it's entirely parallel. There's no difference whatsoever when it comes to a statue like this. So this can be nice if you're doing an outdoor scene. I very rarely use this light for anything like this when it comes to actually making something look appealing, because you can see you don't really have a lot of control with this. You would have to start blocking in something, but it's fantastic if you're trying to emulate sunlight. In this case, we can also change the angle of the light as well. So now you can see that this would emulate it being a lot softer. So a higher angle will give you a lot softer results. But it's also where you need more samples as well for the light as well. Again, we can choose color temperature. We can make this really warm, like a crazy warm sun, or we can make it into a really, really cool sunlight as well. In theory, sunlight should, be perfectly white because that's a sun, but since it scatters through the atmosphere, it just depends on what time of day it is. And more importantly, what mood you want to convey in your scene. You're rendering in 3D, don't let the physical world stand in the way of your visions. Then we have a point light, and this does exactly what you would assume. This is a point in space. This is also really handy if you're doing something like if you have a light bulb, then I really prefer to use point lights. And you can see how dramatically different this character looks, or this prop looks, based on just a simple light. Under the each light, which doesn't come from the Arnold menu, we have to go to actually, well, the Arnold menu, just to make sure that we can change the settings. So we can set this to 2, and now we can just change where this comes from. So maybe she has like a glowing orb or something where the apple is. I assume it's an apple, is a fruit of some kind. A little tip as well, this comes back to what we talked about in the snapping chapter. If you want to snap this to this point, you can hold down the V key, and now we can just snap it. And now you can see it just snaps directly. So if you want this to snap to an arm, whatever it might be, we can just easily snap this to the points. We can move it up a little, and then we can maybe just hide the little light in here. So now we can see it. It's like she has a magical fruit or something like that. So the point light, really powerful. Let's delete the point light. And let's look into the spotlight as well. This is similar to a spotlight like you might use at a theater stage. When you're moving this around, it might be a good idea just to pause the render, because at this point we don't actually need it to update, because we're not nearly there yet. Like, there's no point in seeing a live update yet for this. A little tip as well, which we covered in our manipulator chapter, is now you can see that I'm moving this up and down like this, but the direction of the light is here. So what I can do is I can hold down the W key and set this to object, and now it's a bit easier to actually move and translate this into place. So instead of having to W key and world, instead of having to kind of move it up like so, I can just hold on W, world, and now we just move it up and down. Hit play, so now I'm in a good spot with it. And then we can increase the intensity or the exposure under Arnold. Set this to 5. And now you can see that it's like she's on a theater stage. This is also really why I love lighting. I really, really like lighting. I was between if I should become a modeler or a lighter, because I think lighting is so fascinating. We can also change the general drop off. This is how you can just see what this is doing. And we can change the penumbra angle, which is the general angle of, which is how soft the actual angle of it at the end is. And we can change the cone angle as well. How wide is it? So if you want some crazy film noir-esque shot, you can really do that. A little tip as well is if we go to panels and then we do look through selected, now we can actually look through the light. So now we can really go in here and we can refine what this looks like. This is something I pretty much only use for the spotlight, because now you can really just go in and change this dramatically. It's super useful. So these are the lights I tend to use the most in Maya. Let's delete the spotlight and let's go back to the key and the rim light. Let's hit play. Now we'll talk about a feature which is fantastic. This is light linking. This means that you can now link a light to a specific object. In this case, let's say we want the rim light to only affect the actual character and not affect anything else. We can now go to Window, Relationship Editors, Light Linking, and we're just going to be setting this to the light centric. Under the light group, this is why we group stuff, this is why we name stuff, we can now set the rim light, and now it will, everything which is selected will be affected by the light. So you can see that everything is currently selected. But if we now go in and we deselect the actual statue, you can see what happens. You can see that now it's a part of it, and now it's not a part of it. So now it's a part of the statue, and if we deselect it, now it's not a part of the statue. Same with the backdrop as well. Now it's a part of it, and now it's not a part of it. So this is really handy. This is different from what we did before, where we actually used the visibility sliders. The difference is that that would do a global change so that it wouldn't be visible at all in the diffuse or in the spec. In this case, we're just straight up masking it to this. Here you can see that it's still very much visible in the diffuse. It's just not visible in anything else. So I use this a lot if I really want to control my lighting. Let's say you want some very high highlights in the eye, but you don't want to affect the actual head, then I'll have a light just around the head, and I'll just light link it to the reflectivity material of the eyes. So that's super useful. Let's say you have the ball or the apple or whatever this is, and you want this to have a very specific color, some kind of magical object. Then you can make another area light. You can light link it, make it nice and purple, and would only ever affect this object. So light linking is really handy. It's very simple to do. We can set the light, and we can just click on the object we want it to, or we can just deselect it by default. If it's selected, it will be visible. If it's not selected, it will not be visible. So to sum it up, the light I use by far the most is found under Arnold, Lights, and Area Light. This is really one of the lights you're going to be using all the time, and you can use this for all sorts of things. This is similar to how you would light a film set as well, where you would use something similar to area lights. Basically, you have a lamp behind it, and you have a white cloth around it to diffuse the light, and then you just get this really nice and soft light. You'll change the general intensity of it by going to the exposure and setting a number. This is exponential, so make sure that you don't go too crazy with it. Generally, don't go above something like 10. If you go around 14, you'll go absolutely nuts. To change color, you can use color temperature, or you can set it under the color slider. If you want to change the actual visibility of the different shader attributes, we can do that. So now you can see that we have nice pink light in only the reflections. And if you want more lights, we can find them under Create, Lights, and here we have Direction Light, Point Light, and a Spotlight.